Think it looks like people it's slowing down, so Ming, whenever you're ready.
Alrighty, welcome to week 4 of our Night Owl AAC webinar series. Tonight's topic is a lifetime with AAC, birth to school age, and we're going to be focusing on transitioning with AAC from the early intervention setting to the school age setting. Logistically, for those who have been here for the last couple of weeks, this is probably familiar to you at this point, but for any newcomers we have enabled live captioning. If you don't see live captions, you may need to update your Zoom account to the latest version. We ask that you make all comments in the chat box and send all questions to Jen and Haley in the question and answer box. There will be time at the end for any questions that you may have. Our learning objectives for tonight are to identify where AAC should be included in the IFSP and the IEP. That's the Individualized Family Service Plan and the Individualized Education Plan. Identify 3 communication needs children may have transitioning into the school setting. And finally, list 3 resources available to teams when transitioning from early intervention to school. As a disclaimer, I am a speech-language pathologist specializing in AAC, and I am speaking from that perspective. I will use a variety of identity first and person first language, so you may hear me say things like AAC user and person who uses AAC. And this webinar is brought to you by Tech Owl. Tech Owl is short for Technology for Our Whole Lives. We are Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Act program. We are housed within the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, and we implement all assistive technology programs for Pennsylvanians with disabilities and older Pennsylvanians with assistive technology needs. A couple of our programs, just to outline a few. One of our biggest programs is Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Lending Library, where Pennsylvanians can request to borrow all types of assistive technology. We provide one-on-one demonstrations of assistive technology. We provide trainings for organizations and community trainings in general. We have a free special phone program for people with any disability, provided that they meet income eligibility requirements. They do qualify to get, or they will qualify to get a free phone. That's landlines and mobile phones. We also have another telecommunication distribution program. That's the National Deaf Blind Equipment Distribution Program. That program is for people who are both deaf and blind, and that program is called I Can Connect. We provide emergency preparedness services. We have an AAC community. ACES is an intensive 2-week summer program that we run every other summer for AAC users. We will not run it this summer, but we do invite people to start looking at it for next summer. And then we have a reused equipment program that people can donate assistive technology to, or not assistive technology, but assistive mobility equipment to, and a Create Together program that we allow community members to collaborate with designers in our department to 3D print assistive technology. And getting right into it. So just a quick review. Augmentative and alternative communication is any device, system, strategy, or other tool that supports or supplants oral language and acts as a bridge to create or increase communication opportunities during daily routines and activities. When we're in the early intervention setting, we typically consider AAC when there are language delays, when there are excessive gaps between expressive and receptive language, when children demonstrate speech difficulties, so it's difficult to understand them, or articulation difficulties, and to mitigate any frustrations that may occur as a result of communication breakdowns. There are no prerequisites to the implementation of AAC in early intervention, so even emergent communicators may be introduced to AAC. AAC is used to bridge gaps between the child's needs and abilities, and the most successful AAC systems are those that are efficiently and accessibly built into daily routines and activities. Just to review the AAC continuum, It ranges from no-tech AAC to high-tech AAC. I don't want anyone to think of this as like a step-by-step process, but more of like a spectrum on which any AAC system will fall. As far as no-tech AAC, it is free, it's inexpensive, it's readily available. It doesn't require significant training. A lot of times you'll see parents or team members implement no-tech AAC systems in the home environment. So on the picture, or the picture on the screen that I have here, those are communication cards with just yes and no. But one of my favorite examples of a no-tech AAC system is refrigerator magnets, and using those for kids to communicate things that they want to eat. Mid-tech AAC systems are typically moderately priced, and they may require initial training. They're not fancy, they're typically battery operated, and they also tend to have very specific communication messages that often don't change. And then our high-tech AAC systems are expensive, they're very sophisticated, they tend to require ongoing trainings because the software do change and update over time. These are very comprehensive systems. Messages that can be communicated on these tend to not be very limited. And just as a pointer, high-tech systems do sometimes fail. So a good backup system for our high-tech AAC systems are the low-tech systems that we went over a moment ago. So transition, we're gonna get into transitioning now. Transitioning is the process of just moving from one phase of life to another phase of life. It's just the natural process. And as we talk about transitioning from early intervention to the school age setting, I'm going to focus a lot on the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So you'll hear me call it IDEA from here on out. IDEA Part C focuses on early intervention services between the ages of 0 and 3. Services are provided, children with developmental delays or those with conditions that impact development. Then moving into IDEA Part B, Section 619. So this is still Part B of IDEA. This is just a grant for additional services to the preschool population. So those are kids between the ages of 3 and 5. And again, it continues to serve children with a documented disability. And then IDEA Part B is the provision of a free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment for children with disabilities between the ages of 5 and 21. Again, continues to service children with documented disabilities that impact their access to the academic setting. So IDEA Part C determines the implementation and maintenance of comprehensive, coordinated, multidisciplinary services for early intervention. Again, it's for children between the ages of 0 and 3 who have a developmental delay or a diagnosed disorder, and these services are free. To be eligible for early intervention services, children are typically evaluated across the domains listed on the screen. So that's cognition, communication, social and emotional development, and physical development. And then after their evaluation, the team will take into consideration determining factors, which include formal assessment measures, so any assessment battery that was completed, clinical observation and judgment of the people who evaluated the child, and then any impact of any known diagnoses that may impact the child's development will also be taken into consideration. And the way early intervention works is that a child will qualify for services as outlined in the previous slide. The team will be established after the child is determined eligible for services. Once the team is established, those professionals will draft their goals based on the information that they read in the evaluation report. The goals are drafted. The team will then meet for an initial individualized family service plan meeting, that's your IFSP. The plan is developed, everyone signs off on it, everyone agrees, and then services are implemented. In early intervention, all services are family-centered, all goals are family-centered. You get a lot of parent training in early intervention. Also, all of the services tend to take place in the home environment because that's the child's most natural setting at that point in time in their development. When we're documenting AAC in the Individualized Family Service Plan, we're looking at Section 3 of the IFSP, so that's special considerations. And we're specifically looking at number 5 for AAC, so does the child have communication needs? If you think they need AAC, then the answer is yes. And then number 6, does the child need assistive technology, devices, and or services? The answer would be yes for AAC. And not only do you want to document in 6 that the child needs an AAC system, but you also want to document any team training that may be required. So this is where you'll document training of parents for early intervention and other team members as necessary. In the early intervention setting, funding is provided through Medicaid, private insurance, and private pay options. So that's how we fund AAC devices in the early intervention setting. Then just as the child and their family are getting used to the routine of early intervention service providers coming in and providing services, the child turns 3 and they will no longer qualify for early intervention. So they then transition to preschool services. So these are provided under IDEA Part B, Section 619, which identifies the importance of and provides continued access to services between early intervention and school. Again, this is for that preschool population between the ages of 3 and 5, and services continue to be free. The way that it works is that a child is reevaluated by a new team. Usually this reevaluation starts when the child is still in early intervention, around 2 years, 6 months old. After the child is reevaluated by the preschool team, a new team is established. That new team will then establish goals according to the reevaluation again. The goals are drafted. These goals tend to be preschool relevant, but some of them are still focused on the child's overall development. You get a new plan, so you no longer have an individualized family service plan at this point. The child and their family will now have a preschool IEP, which looks a lot like the regular school IEP. Placement is established, so sometimes, depending on how the child did on their evaluation, if the child needs to go into a center-based placement, in Philadelphia, that's places like Elwyn Seedlings, then placement will be established and documented in that preschool IEP. And then the team will have an initial IEP meeting. During the meeting, everyone will review the goals that the professionals have set and make sure everyone's in agreement. And then again, services are rendered. So what changes from early intervention to preschool? The team changes significantly. None of your early intervention providers are the same in the preschool setting. The environment of the services may change. So if the child was not receiving services in the school setting, but now they're suddenly going to preschool or daycare, a lot of times the services will take place in the preschool setting. Sometimes children will still receive services in the home environment. And then finally, the goals will also change. The child's goals will also change. Again, services and goals in the preschool IEP are structured around a preschool-centered approach. So that just means that, again, if the child is in school, they're getting their services in school, they're not getting their services at home anymore. And a lot of their goals, because the preschool setting is getting children ready for school, a lot of their goals are now focusing on the preschool setting. But again, you will still see some children whose goals focus on their overall development. In the IEP, AAC is documented in the same way that it was documented in the IFSP. So again, it's section 3, number 5. Does the child have communication needs? Yes. Does the child need assistive technology, devices, and their services? Yes. This is where you'll document AAC. And again, this is also where you'll document any training for teams that as it may be necessary. And then number 7 is also really important. Is it anticipated that the preschooler will be transitioning from the early intervention program because of the transition in life of a family child? Not necessarily, but anytime a child is transitioning, you want to take that into consideration and document that. And in that transition piece, you want to document AAC there as well. Funding, again, in this program, so this is the preschool program, it comes through Medicaid, private insurance and private pay options. That's how we're funding AAC devices at this point. And once again, yes.
Sorry, Ming. Sorry to interrupt. So we have a question that I kind of want to interrupt with so we don't lose it. Someone asked, how does this work with a child living in an ICF?
What is an ICF? Do they mind
Intensive
elaborating?
care facility?
Oh, I'm sorry. Living in an intensive care facility. You want to document
Or
all of your
intermediate care facility is what they've, sorry, I apologize.
No worries, no worries. You want to document their transitioning in AAC across the board. So if they have an IFSP in the ICF, it will be the AAC needs will be documented in that. When they transition to a new setting, you still want to have those AAC needs documented in any documentation across settings. Does that make sense?
She says it does.
Okay, perfect. Just document it across settings. Okay, moving on. So then the child has their 5th birthday and they're no longer qualifying or eligible for preschool services. So now they are moving to school age. And this takes us into idea part B. Again, this is the free and appropriate public education to children with disabilities within the least restrictive environment. This is for children between the ages of 5 and 21. I put 3 because 3-year-olds are still considered Part B, although they're in Section 619. And then services continue to be free. So how does it work? An evaluation team will review the child's file. So this evaluation team comes from the public school setting. They will do a file review of all of the child's previous evaluations, all of the child's previous IEP goals and IFSP goals, all of the progress that the child made in the early intervention setting, in the preschool setting. And then they will determine if additional assessments are required. If they decide that they need to do further assessments, the additional assessments are facilitated by the school team. Typically, these assessments take place in their preschool setting, or they'll request that parents bring the child to whatever their homeschool would be to complete the assessments. Then continued eligibility is determined. Once a child is determined to continue to be eligible for services, placement will be established. So placement looks like what type of setting will this child receive services in. So in Philadelphia, do they need to go into an autistic support classroom? Can they go into the regular education classroom? Or do they need any type of special education programming at all? After placement is established, the team is established because placement is according to schools. Then the team is established according to the school that the child is at. There is an IEP that is drafted. So again, the professionals in that setting will draft goals according to the information that they receive from the evaluation team. They will hold an initial IEP meeting. When at that meeting, everyone will agree. If everyone agrees, it's signed, and then services are delivered. So what changes at this point? Again, the team will change, the setting will change, goals for the child will change, and the funding source does change in the school age setting. The focus in the school age setting is on academic impact. So goals are no longer written for the child's overall development within each domain. They are instead attached to core learning standards, and there is no service delivery for any goals that are not academically impacting the child. As far as the IEP goes, again, it looks very similar to the preschool IEP, almost identical. But this is where we document all communication needs that will be addressed, and also where we document AAC needs as they are discussed and outlined at the IEP meeting. And again, any necessary training for team members. It is worth noting that at this point, because this is a school age program, the IEP is, training for team members is no longer relevant to parents at all. That means like we're training like classroom teachers on how to use AAC, or the music teacher on how to use AAC. Just to reiterate, all services and goals are focused on academic impact, and services are rendered only in the school setting. So the SET framework was created by Joy Zabala. And this is just a 4-part decision-making model that informs intervention in the school setting. Let's go over it. Oops. Okay. So the SET framework focuses on 4 things: the student, their environment, any tasks and tools. As far as the student, the SET framework is looking at the student's strengths and whatever their needs are across domains and subjects. Again, those domains are things like physical, social, emotional development, communication needs. And then in an environment, we're looking at the student placement. So what setting is the student in? Is the student in the regular education classroom? Are they in a special education classroom? If they're in a special education classroom, what kind of special education classroom are they in? We're looking at how material is taught in that setting. And then we're also looking at the equipment that's available in that setting. For tasks, we're looking at specific expectations that the student must meet in order to be successful. And then finally, for tools, we're looking at everything the student needs to meet expectations that have been set. So if I had an example of a nonverbal student, and they're in a special education classroom, so that's their environment, and the only equipment that's in that classroom is a Big Mac, so that's just like a switch, one button that's sitting by the bathroom door, and it only communicates one message: I need to go to the bathroom. Well, what I need to look at, what other tasks does the student need to be able to communicate, and then consider, does that student have all of the tools that they need to meet those expectations? And the answer would be they probably need another type of AAC system, because the one Big Mac to communicate I need to go to the bathroom is probably not enough for the student to adequately access that environment. Another framework that schools here in Pennsylvania use often to determine assistive technology needs for students is the Assessing Student Needs for Assistive Technology, the ASNAT. It was developed by the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative, and used to determine assistive technology for many domains, including communication, positioning, and mobility, reading, writing, computer access, and mathematics. The WADI looks a lot like the SET, except that it takes into consideration sensory needs for the student and the environment that they're in. So again, under the student, you're looking at what are the student's abilities and difficulties related to this specific area of communication, what environmental impacts or what environmental factors impact the student's communication, and then with those two together, what sensory challenges does the student have that may impact communication. Finally, we're looking at tasks. What communication tasks does the student need to be able to do in this setting? And taking all 3 of those into consideration, we're then narrowing the focus to identify a specific assistive technology tool. Typically with the WADI, once we figure out the tool and whatever solutions we're going to use, the implementation plan provides time to go through a trial period, and then everyone comes back after the trial period to talk about what's working, what doesn't work. Do we need another trial? Like, do we need another trial, another AAC system? And if we do not, then we come up with a follow-up plan. Like, this is the system that we're going to use, and when will we get the permanent system set up for the student? Things like that. So the goal across the board at any point in the school setting is to get the child an AAC system that will allow them to access the academic setting and make sure that the child has access to said setting. So if the child needs eye gaze equipment to access a high-tech AAC device, we're making sure that they have that equipment as well, not just giving them the system. Now there are a couple of transitions you might see in the school setting, within the school setting. One of those transitions is an IEP to a 504 plan, or a 504 plan to an IEP. The 504 plan, we didn't really discuss it much, but it comes from Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. The 504 plan just prevents students with disabilities from being discriminated against I think one of the biggest things to highlight with the 504 plan is that it is not funded by the federal or state government. It is funded by the schools, the school itself. If a child has a 504 plan, it's funded by the school itself. So occasionally you might see a child move from an IEP to a 504 plan, or a child move from a 504 plan to an IEP. But in any case, if the child is transitioning with AAC to either plan, you want to document that transition and the AAC needs within each plan. A more common transition within the school setting is a transition from one IEP to another. So sometimes, because people change, people grow, sometimes children do also experience regression. So sometimes we need to call a meeting, or parents may request a new evaluation. The team will then reevaluate the child and determine the child's current strengths and needs. And after that's determined, everything will be documented. All new changes will be documented in the IEP. Again, with AAC, if AAC was in the previous IEP, you'll want to document whether or not the child will continue to use AAC in their new IEP or need AAC in their new IEP, and why that is. Why do they still need it? Why do they no longer need it? What changes? Goals change in the school setting. The team will also change, or may change. It may not change. The setting may change or may not change. And then funding for our school age kids comes through Access. In Pennsylvania, it's Access, Billing, or Medicaid. The school district provides funding. And again, for AAC devices, you can continue to receive funding through private insurance and through private pay options. So just to quickly summarize the transition with AAC, in early intervention, services are covered by IDEA Part C. Services are documented in the Individualized Family Service Plan. All goals and services are family-centered, and there is extensive parental involvement. When the child moves to the school age setting, services are rendered by IDEA Part B. They're documented in the Individualized Education Plan. All services and goals are focused on academic impact, and parents are team members, but they are not extensively involved anymore. As providers, we have a role in the transition process. So first, just understanding the transition challenges that parents and their kids will face. Obviously, with each transition, there's a new team, there's also a new setting, there are different goals, and there are additional expectations and wants and needs. And then communication challenges, there can be minimal understanding. Receptive language aside, perhaps the child does not understand what is expected of them in this new setting. Sometimes children don't necessarily have the advocacy skills that they need in the new setting, or they haven't developed those advocacy skills yet. And then because there are communication breakdowns, it comes with a lot of frustration. So as providers on the early intervention team, it's our job to explain to parents what to expect as their children age out of early intervention, prepare them for all of the evaluations that are coming, initial meetings, regular ongoing team meetings. Maybe to help parents feel more comfortable, you can highlight similarities between early intervention and school age settings. You want to make sure, as the provider, you want to make sure that the child has everything they need before your services end. So if you determine that a high-tech AAC system is necessary for this child to communicate, then you want to try your very best to make sure that they have that high-tech system in place and completely programmed before your services end, so that there's a smooth transition to the next setting. You can make parents aware of what their rights are as parents of children with disabilities, and you can provide guidance on what parents should expect and what they should ask for during those initial IEP meetings. Providers can also help parents understand the restriction of IEP goals. So moving away from that IFSP, where the goals are very family-centered and there's a lot of parent modeling, just helping parents understand that that's not going to happen when the child moves to an IEP, and then helping parents explore other avenues for non-academic impact goals. You also want to help parents understand the equipment that the school has and how it fits their child's needs. So back to my earlier example with the child in the classroom with only the Big Mac, the one Big Mac that says, I need to go to the bathroom. Well, this help parents understand that this is the equipment that's available in that classroom. This is how it can fit your child's needs as far as needing to go to the bathroom, but this may not be the best fit for your child's communication overall, so you may want to explore other things. Providers can also help parents set an expectation regarding communication about their child's progress from the team, from the school team, and help parents approach the school team as partners, and then finally help parents advocate for their child's needs in the school setting. You want to emphasize the importance of a plan to parents. With each transition, things can be challenging. So perhaps parents introduce their child to their new teachers or their new service providers early on. Maybe parents take an opportunity to educate the team, the school team, on their child who's new to their team. Maybe parents will practice the transition early on. So if parents know that for kindergarten, their kid is going to this new school and they're going to have like a 10-minute commute every day. Maybe parents practice like getting up early in the morning, having breakfast, getting in the car, and driving to the school a month before school starts so that the child gets used to that part of their day in this new transitional phase. And then everything's not a total shock to the child's system when school begins. And then finally, I cannot reiterate this enough, make sure that AAC is documented in the child's IEP. As far as resources go, providers are phenomenal resources for parents and children, because as providers, we go through these transitional periods often, frequently, but for a lot of our families, remember, this is probably their first time going through a transition, or one of very few times going through a transition. So as providers, you're an invaluable resource, but other resources you can provide include procedural safeguards notice. So the procedural safeguards notice is like this long 20-page document that comes with every school evaluation in Pennsylvania. And it just outlines parents' rights as parents of children with disabilities, and it's full of legal jargon. So perhaps parents or service providers can walk through this document with parents and help parents really understand what the document says and what their rights are. Another document that providers may consider sharing with parents is the notice of transition. The notice of transition essentially just states when transition meetings will be held. Typically, you get these pretty early, like in the transition process. So if you're transitioning from early intervention to preschool, this notice of transition typically comes around when the child is 2 years, 6 months. If you're transitioning from preschool to school age, this notice of transition typically comes around 4 years, 6 months. It outlines the age of transition eligibility. So again, that 3-year mark or that 5-year mark. And in Philadelphia specifically, it's very important to take note of intent to register, because for children who are transitioning from the preschool setting to the school age setting, the public school team will only evaluate children if parents intend to register their children in a public school. If parents do not intend to register their parents in a public school, then the school team will not evaluate that child. Another really valuable resource is the Dear Colleagues letter, which summarizes, it's a guidance or support of children who use assistive technology. It essentially summarizes the importance of assistive technology, including AAC, across academic settings. I would encourage parents to read it. It's very long, it's like 20 pages as well, but it's a really good resource for parents if they encounter professionals who are not SLPs, who do not understand why their child's AAC system is necessary across all settings. Then general terminology is also really important. As providers, we're used to all of the acronyms that appear in these IFSPs and IEPs. And sometimes it's just helpful to sit down with parents and help them understand what these acronyms mean and what they refer to. So for example, the LEA is the local education agency, but typically in Philadelphia County specifically, that often refers to the school principal. Sometimes it may refer to other authorities in the school setting as well. And then Patan is another great resource that has all kinds of links to different documents that are annotated online. They're annotated online. So you have annotated IEPs, annotated IFSPs that providers can provide to parents, just to show parents what to expect and what they're reading and help parents understand what they're reading in these documents. Patan also has a couple of the documents that I just showed. So that procedural safeguards notice that I showed is on Patan, and the intent to register is also on Patan. And then finally, you can use TechOwl as a resource. So again, we provide information and assistance for assistive technology, including AAC. We do have an assistive technology lending library where Pennsylvanians can borrow AAC devices or iPads that have different AAC software downloaded on them. We provide demonstrations, and we have assistive technology funding and assistance. Please join us on social media. We have an extensive social media platform on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. You can contact us by phone or email, and you can also visit techowlpa.org. Again, we are from the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University, and I invite everyone to attend our final webinar next week that will be led by my colleague, Cassie, who's not here tonight. And finally, it's time for questions. Let's see. I'll leave the screen up for anyone who has or needs certificates or Act 48 credits.
Yes, Ming, I'm going to jump in for a second to just clarify a little bit about the Act 48 credits and certificates. So if you are somebody who just wants to provide us feedback or needs a general certificate for training for your employer or just to add to your portfolio, please complete the red QR code. And I'm also going to share those links in the chat as well to be able to click on. The teal or blue one of the QR code is if you need Pennsylvania Act 48 credits, that you can also give feedback and provide a certificate, or we'll provide you a certificate if you need one of those as well. But there are additional questions and things like that that are required for Act 48 credits to be awarded. So if you need those, that's the form to complete. And we do verify attendance just because we have to do that, again, for the different credits to be awarded. And if you're having any issues with the links or the forms, please feel free to send me an email and I can get you that link sent out. If you happened to attend a previous webinar, but that we did earlier in the month, but did not get a chance to fill out the form, and you're not seeing that date in the drop-down menu on the form, again, just shoot me an email and we can work something out so you can get a certificate or the needed credit for that. But if you're here tonight, tonight's date should be available in the form. Just complete that. We try really hard to get them sent out probably tomorrow, but I'd say worst case scenario, depending on how many people need one, because I do it by hand, well, on the computer by hand, they might have not send them out till next week. But if you do need the Act 48 credits, we are sending those out at the completion. So after next week's webinar, all of that information will then be processed and sent to the state. If in, I would say, a month or two following the webinar, if you're not seeing that on your Act 48 account, to reach out to us and let us know that you're not seeing it, and we'll try to work that out on our end to the best of our ability. And it looks like we have a lot of questions, so I'm going to put those links in the chat.
Ming, can you go back to the slide with the letter from the Department of Education? We were told it looks slightly different in the handout, and someone would like to see that. Thank you. And then while that's happening, we have lots of questions in the chat. For a new AAC user in a self-contained classroom, what thing can we use to measure the appropriateness of AAC goals?
I would recommend using either the set and reset framework or that WADI, the Wisconsin Assistive Technology Initiative resource that I shared earlier. I think the WADI is particularly useful because it already outlines time. It puts a time frame on a trial period and allows for documentation on the positives of whatever AAC system you've implemented, and then allows you to revisit what were the strengths of that system, what were the weaknesses of that system, what challenges did the student have using that system, what challenges did the team have using that system, and then sort of like just regroup and regather from there.
The next question was, how would teams know if they need to trial more? So I'm assuming it means if they need to trial different systems.
You'll know if the child, first of all, when you introduce an AAC system to a child and they take no interest in it, then you probably need to introduce a new AAC system. If they are taking interest to the system that you've introduced, but you're finding that the system is not necessarily useful for all of the child's needs, maybe it's not a matter of trialing a new system, but making sure the child, first of all, can access the system adequately and efficiently, but second of all, making sure that the system is programmed with everything or almost everything that the child needs or wants to communicate according to the environment that they're in.
We had a specific question about specific app. If an individual has apraxia, is an app like LAMP going to make things easier or harder, or would that be beneficial? I would think it would depend on what type of apraxia they have, whether
right,
it's
it depends.
apraxia. Yeah.
Right. It depends on the apraxia, it depends on the individual. Honestly, that one you just have to trial and retrial until you find a system that works for that specific individual.
Are there resources available to help parents understand or advocate for services that the school has lowered?
You'll have to ask the school. I know there are community resources in the city of Philadelphia. They're called like community advocates or parent advocates is what they're called. And so they would be a great resource in the city of Philadelphia. But you'd have to ask the school, or you could, again, if the school has lowered services, it's probably because, I don't want to say that, but it's probably because either the goal is no longer totally relevant to the child in their current academic setting. And again, just remembering that in the school setting, goals and services are only rendered according to academic impact. So sometimes it may be necessary to seek outside services, but if you're looking for a specific resource for services that have been lowered because of the schools, I guess the schools, their input according to the assessments that they've done, then you can get in touch with like parent advocates in your school system if you're in Philadelphia. Otherwise, get in touch with the school.
Is AAC a separate service or grouped with speech services? I'm assuming in the IEP.
In the IEP, AAC is just a type of, or it's within speech services. So it's not a separate service completely. If the child is getting speech services and they need AAC, it's part of the implementation of their speech services. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Other than obvious laws, are there specific regulations that mandate AAC for nonverbal children that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of. Again, if a child needs AAC, and you're in the school setting, again, IDEA Part B requires that the school provides that free and appropriate public education. By appropriate, what is the most appropriate education that this child needs? Not like appropriate for everyone in general. If you have a nonverbal child in the school setting, AAC is probably the most appropriate system or one of the most appropriate systems to include in their IEP. And you want to like be well within IDEA Part B. That is a federal law. Schools have to abide by that. So just highlight IDEA Part B, honestly. I don't know of any other laws that are particularly relevant to that.
This one says, hello, I'm the parent of a preschool AAC user moving from an IU classroom to a private preschool with IU supports. What kind of resources can I suggest be provided to the general education preschool teachers to support AAC users? And do you have suggestions for funding a buddy device to be used by the preschool teacher and classroom peers? My child doesn't like others to use his device.
I would recommend getting with your child's speech language pathologist in the IU, and ask them what services or AAC specifically, ask them this question specifically because they work with your child. They know your child's goals. Um, they know what progress your child has made, and they also are probably more aware of where your child will be when they get to that private school setting. So first, I would get with that speech language pathologist and work with them to identify AAC systems and resources that will be appropriate for your child specifically in their new setting. And then part two, buddy devices. So they're kind of difficult because for the most part, no one's going to fund a device for other children unless, you know, the other children also need a device, like they medically need, they have a medical necessity for a device. Perhaps the school does have like an iPad system, and maybe the school will be willing to download another AAC software on that iPad. Maybe the school has some Big Macs that the child can use, but also just training the other children in the classroom. Oh, this is how this child talks. We don't want to take his or their device away from them. We just want to listen to them and talk to them using words. Are there any other questions?
Not in the Q&A at the moment, but if anybody does have other questions.
Are we done with this slide?
I think you can go back to the form or the end, Ming.
Okay.
And somebody did share a resource in the chat as well, which was for parents looking for advocacy support or resources, and that is parent2parent.org.
So there was one other question. What if the SLP is lacking in experience? If they don't admit it, but we tell them, we can tell from the goals and responses, and they said they've already been trained. Are there any recommendations?
Are there other SLPs that you can reach out to in the IU? Does your child have a private SLP, or are there other team members in general on the child's IFSP that you would feel comfortable with consulting?
So I think in this situation, you know, you can make your thoughts known as the parent, and you can explain to them the individual was privately placed, and you can come with your information for the SLP and provide them with resources that you've known to be really beneficial in training that you have learned about. You know, sometimes different therapists have different ideas and different opinions and come from different schools of thought as well.
Do we have any other questions? And again, please feel free to complete the feedback forms so we can make sure we can get you the correct credits and certificates. Yes, the links to the feedback forms should also be in the chat, but I'm going to copy and paste and put them back. If it'll, hold on, hopefully it lets me copy and paste. This one is only. Oh, the link for registration. To register for the next webinar. Yes, we can pull that up. 1 second, and I will share that in the chat as well. So next week we will be here at the same time, 5 o'clock Eastern, and we will be talking about school age through adulthood, and our fabulous colleague Cassie Callia will be leading that discussion. Pulling it up, and please note, you will have to register for that webinar separately. Each webinar has a separate link, and I just posted that in the chat as well. So once you register, you'll get a brand new link for next week's webinar.
Are we all good here with the QR codes?
Final call for any last questions or comments in the chat before we let everyone carry on with their evenings.
Well, it doesn't look like we're seeing any more questions coming in at the moment. So I think we can go ahead and conclude tonight's webinar. Ming, thank you for leading and for sharing all of this great information. Thank you to all the participants for participating and for asking all of those great questions to facilitate an ongoing discussion of very important topics that as a community, we need to, keep working and advocating towards a better future for AAC users. So we hope to see you all next week. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And we hope you all have a great rest of your evening. Bye now, everyone.